The summer heat pressed down like an invisible weight over the small city of Edgewood, a place whose history carried the scars of tension and silence, of words spoken too late and of actions never accounted for. For the residents who lived their daily lives there, Edgewood was nothing more than another middle American town with its diners, auto shops, barber chairs, and a downtown strip that glowed brighter on weekends. But beneath that outward charm, beneath the neon and laughter, there was always an undertow, a pulse that whispered of suspicion and of rules that did not apply equally to everyone who walked its streets. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video, because when you stop doing this, YouTube understands that you don't like this content and stops recommending good stories like this. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. On that particular evening, twin siblings Marcus and Maya Williams found themselves drifting toward the glow of a popular bar tucked into the heart of downtown. They were both professionals who had come a long way from their modest beginnings, their lives disciplined and marked by an unyielding sense of purpose. To anyone else, they looked like any pair of young adults dressed sharply, ready to enjoy a drink after a long day. Yet what no one there knew, what no one could even guess, was that the Williams twins were not just any patrons. They were FBI agents, sworn into service to uphold justice, protect the innocent, and stand firm against threats both foreign and domestic. But that was their secret. Their badge and credentials rested quietly, hidden from view, concealed beneath fabric and composure. Their very existence in that bar, at that moment, carried the irony of people who had given their lives to enforcing the law but would soon find themselves crushed under the weight of suspicion from the very people sworn to protect. The night had begun without warning signs. Marcus, taller by a fraction, carried himself with a seriousness that seemed etched into his features, though those who knew him well could sense the warmth he concealed. Maya, equally confident, had a sharpness in her gaze, a calm intelligence that spoke of someone who rarely missed the undercurrents in a room. They were not there to draw attention. They were there for release, to catch a breath after weeks of grueling hours and unrelenting cases. The bar itself thrummed with music, laughter spilling from clusters of friends gathered at high tables and booths. Light bounced off glass, off half-finished pints and neon signs, and created that familiar haze of weekend escape. Marcus and Maya settled near the back, aware but relaxed, and allowed themselves to sink into the rhythm of something normal. But normal was not a gift granted evenly. At first it began with stares, subtle enough, quiet enough, but sharp, the kinds of stares that scratch at your awareness until you can no longer ignore them. A group of off-duty officers, easily identified by their posture, their cropped hair, and the way they carried themselves like authority never loosened its grip, occupied a table not far from the twins. They were drinking heavily, their laughter a bit too loud, their remarks laced with something that cut through the background noise like glass scraping against metal. Marcus felt it before he fully saw it. The weight of eyes lingering too long, narrowing in calculation. Maya, with her trained awareness, picked up on it immediately. They exchanged no words, no signals, but shared the same silent recognition. The officers had marked them. The moments stretched, the tension quiet at first but gathering with each breath. The group of men began whispering, leaning closer, smirks tugging at their faces. Their laughter, once careless, now carried an edge that was unmistakable. In their gazes lived something old, something rooted not in that bar alone but in decades of power and prejudice. The officers did not recognize Marcus or Maya. To them, they were simply two black patrons sitting quietly in a bar where, in the officers' eyes, they didn't belong. That was enough to light suspicion. That was enough to summon contempt. It began with one of the men rising from his seat, staggering slightly from drink but steady enough in his purpose. He wandered too close, leaned against the counter near the twins, and studied them with the audacity of someone who believed his uniform, whether worn or not, granted him the right to judge. Marcus and Maya remained calm, ignoring him, refusing to feed his attempt at provocation. Yet silence often works as fuel for those already determined to start a fire. The man returned to his table, his smirk widened, and his whispers to the others sharpened their eyes into blades. Soon enough, two more of them rose, their footsteps heavy, their presence deliberate. They circled, like shadows stretching into a corner where the light had dimmed. Marcus straightened, his back firm, his jaw tightening with restraint. He had faced dangerous men before, interrogated criminals who had no respect for life, and stood before those who carried real threats in their hands. But there was a particular kind of pressure when danger wore the face of authority. Maya, too, kept her composure, though a storm brewed beneath her calm exterior. She had sworn to uphold justice, yet here they were, living witnesses to its distortion. The officers closed in, their voices dripping with mockery, their questions wrapped as casual banter but delivered with venom. "What are you doing here? Don't you know where you are?" The tone carried less curiosity and more accusation, as though their presence in that bar was itself an offense. The music kept playing. The laughter of other patrons continued, though some grew quieter, watching, pretending not to see but seeing all the same. Edgewood was small. Everyone knew the rules, and everyone knew better than to interfere when the men in blue decided to flex their power. Marcus and Maya gave nothing away. They did not rise. They did not snap back. They simply held their ground in silence, their dignity intact, their credentials still hidden. To reveal their identity too soon would mean surrendering to the very injustice playing out, that they needed to justify their existence in that room. No, they would wait, but the officers did not care for silence. They pressed harder, their voices louder now, their accusations leaning into threats. Words like suspicious, troublemakers, and resisting slipped into the air with deliberate weight, laying the groundwork for whatever story they intended to write, if the night spiraled into violence. It was Maya who sensed it first, the shift in the crowd. Patrons began edging away, shrinking into corners, unwilling to be witnesses but too afraid to leave. The bar itself seemed to still, the music turning into background noise, the laughter replaced with a hushed awareness of what was unfolding. It was not the first time this had happened here, and everyone knew how these nights could end. Marcus's pulse quickened, not from fear but from anger tightly leashed. He thought of their father, a man who had taught them to hold their heads high even when the world pressed down with its heaviest weight. He thought of the badge tucked away in his wallet, the oath he had taken to protect and defend. And he thought of the bitter irony, that here, in a bar where he had come simply to breathe, the very law he served now cornered him as though he were the criminal. The first shove came quick. A hand pressed against his shoulder, not violent yet but testing. A challenge. Maya's hand reached instinctively toward the table, steadying herself, her gaze locking onto the officer with a warning that words could not contain. But restraint is often mistaken for weakness. The shove came again, harder this time, and now words turned sharp. "Stand up, let's see some ID, what are you hiding?" The demand cut through the air, loud enough for everyone in the bar to hear, loud enough to ensure that silence would not protect the twins any longer. Maya's heart pounded, her thoughts racing. To reach for her badge now would be to surrender to their terms, to admit that her identity was the only shield she had, and yet to remain silent was to risk escalation. To risk becoming another story whispered about in Edgewood, another tragedy explained away as resistance. Marcus rose slowly, his movements deliberate, his presence unshaken despite the storm swirling around him. His towering frame caught the light, and for a brief second, silence stretched so thick you could hear the weight of it pressing against the walls. He said nothing, only looked directly into the eyes of the man before him. The officer smirked, mistaking the silence for submission. His hand drifted toward his hip, where a badge was not visible but a weapon would normally rest. The implication was enough, the gesture heavy with threat. The other officers leaned closer, surrounding both Marcus and Maya in a circle that was closing too fast. The crowd held its breath. The bar had transformed into a stage, each second drawing closer to an irreversible act. And then the door opened. Two more officers entered, their uniforms crisp, their presence undeniable. Reinforcements. What had begun as a threat of intimidation was moments away from becoming a full-scale confrontation, backed by the shield of authority. Maya's pulse thundered in her ears. Marcus tightened his fists at his sides, his control fraying at the edges. Their secret, Who they truly were hovered on the brink of revelation. Yet even now, even under the crushing weight of injustice, they hesitated, because once revealed, there would be no going back. The lead officer, older, heavier, his eyes cold with a familiarity of power long unchallenged, stepped forward. His gaze swept the room before locking on the twins. His lips curled into a smile that carried no warmth. "Looks like we've got ourselves some troublemakers," he said. His voice cut through the silence, sealing the night's fate. And as he reached for the handcuffs at his belt, the bar seemed to exhale all at once, the weight of inevitability crashing down. Marcus and Maya stood frozen at the edge of decision, the world watching, the circle closing. Their secret identity burned against their silence, waiting to erupt. But in that moment, as the officer's hand closed around cold steel, the lights of the bar flickered, once, twice, and then went out, plunging the entire room into sudden darkness. The crowd gasped. Single glass shattered, and then chaos. The darkness did not come gently, swallowed the room whole, cutting the neon glow, silencing the jukebox mid-beat, dragging every patron into a void where sight meant nothing, and sound ruled all. For a heartbeat, Edgewood's bar was a cavern of gasps, stumbles, and clattering glass. Marcus felt it first, the shift of bodies pressed too close, the unmistakable scrape of chairs as people recoiled, the half-swallowed curses of men whose control depended on visibility. In that sudden blackness, power tilted. Those who once commanded the room with their uniforms and stares found themselves stripped of their stage. Maya's instincts sharpened. Her training had prepared her for ambushes in dim alleys and raids where shadows betrayed as much as enemies. She breathed evenly, listening, cataloging every sound. An officer's hand brushing metal, a panicked civilian backing into a table, the sharp inhale of someone realizing danger had arrived. She reached under the hem of her jacket, not for her badge, not yet, but for reassurance. The cold, hidden weight of the weapon she carried as silently as her oath. The officers cursed louder now, their voices more bark than command. "Stay where you are. Everyone stay put." But the authority in their tone cracked when wrapped in darkness. Power required witnesses, and here, no eyes confirmed their dominance. The crowd no longer followed like obedient shadows. They moved in panic, bumping into one another, desperate for exits they could not find. Marcus placed a steadying hand on the table, grounding himself. In the dark, memory became map. 3 steps to the wall, 7 to the exit. He calculated escape and confrontation simultaneously, his mind split between survival and justice. But he knew the truth. Leaving was never as simple as walking away, not when the men hunting them wore badges, not when the story could be rewritten in police reports before dawn. Then came the sound, the metallic snap of cuffs being pulled free from leather. The lead officer's voice cut again through the din, closer now, heavy with threat. "Nobody moves. You two, don't think for a second you're walking out of here." Maya's jaw clenched. She had endured slights, insults, and suspicion before, both in childhood and even in the Bureau's own corridors. But here it burned differently. To be cornered not as an agent, not even as a woman, but reduced to a silhouette marked guilty by skin alone. She thought of the oath she had taken, the mornings she and Marcus had run drills until their lungs screamed, the sacrifices that had carved them into protectors of a nation that often forgot to protect them in return. And yet here they stood, reduced, erased, endangered. The first hand groped in the dark, brushing Marcus's shoulder. Without hesitation, he shifted, his body sidestepping with trained precision, the officer stumbling forward into emptiness. A chorus of curses followed, boots scraping across the floor. The men were closing in by sound, not sight, their confidence unraveling but their aggression sharpened by humiliation. Glass shattered near the bar. Someone dropped a bottle, maybe thrown, maybe accidental. Screams erupted, and now chaos consumed the room. Patrons rushed blindly, shoving chairs, slamming into walls, clawing for exits. The officers shouted over them, trying to reclaim order, but authority drowned when fear filled the air. Marcus leaned toward his sister, his voice low but steady. Time. One word, no more. She understood. It was the moment they had both hoped to avoid. The line they had prayed would not need crossing. But the night had chosen otherwise. With practiced motion, Maya pulled her credentials free from her inner pocket. Even in the dark, she knew the weight of the leather case, the embossed seal that had carried her through federal offices, airports, and high-security doors. She gripped it tightly, waiting for even a flicker of light to reveal the truth. Marcus did the same, his badge ready in his palm. And then, like an answer, light returned. Not full, not steady, but flickering emergency bulbs humming to life, casting the bar in a dim red glow. It painted faces in shadows and silhouettes, carving out the chaos in haunting tones. Patrons cowered in corners, officers frozen mid-motion, their hands hovering near holsters and cuffs. And there stood Marcus and Maya, their badges raised, gleaming faintly in crimson light. The moment stretched. Silence fell. For the first time that night, the power shifted entirely. The lead officer's eyes narrowed, confusion flashing before hardening into disbelief. "What the hell is this?" he spat, though his voice trembled beneath its bark. Marcus's gaze cut through him, steady and unflinching. The silence was heavier than any words. Maya's badge caught the glow again, its authority undeniable. Whispers rippled through the crowd. FBI. The word moved like a current, reshaping everything it touched. Those who had stood paralyzed now leaned forward, curious, emboldened. Witnesses had returned, and the story could no longer be written in the officer's favor alone. But power does not surrender easily. The lead officer's face darkened, his pride struck. To him, this was not revelation, it was humiliation. His voice grew louder, sharp enough to mask his fear. "Badges don't mean you're safe, not here. Not tonight." Maya felt the words like a blade pressed against her skin. Here it was, the naked truth of power unchained from law. The badge she had worked her whole life for, the symbol of justice she had believed in, was being stripped before her eyes. Marcus tightened his grip, not on the badge, but on the truth of who they were. He would not cower. He would not shrink. "You're standing in the way of federal agents," he said finally. His voice calm, level, but edged with steel. "Every second you delay, every threat you make, you write your own ending." The officer sneered, but his hand hesitated on the cuffs. The crowd, once complicit in silence, now stirred. Phones appeared, their faint glows cutting through the red, cameras rising like shields of accountability. And still, tension coiled. Because cornered men with power are the most dangerous of all. The lead officer took a step forward, his jaw tight, his pride refusing retreat. His men flanked him, uncertain but loyal, their eyes darting between the badges and the growing crowd of witnesses. The air thickened. One wrong move, one twitch, one slip, and the bar would ignite. Maya's heart pounded, her mind racing with outcomes, with headlines, with funerals dressed as footnotes. But even as fear pressed in, resolve hardened within her. She thought of the Bureau's motto, fidelity, bravery, integrity, and she wondered, was bravery still enough in a world where integrity was bought and fidelity was selective? Then the sirens came, distant at first, faint through the walls but growing louder. Blue and red lights pierced the windows, washing over the dim red glow inside. Reinforcements again, but whose side would they take? The lead officer's smirk returned, a cruel glint in his eyes. "Looks like backups here. Let's see how far those badges get you when it's my word against yours." The twins held their ground, unflinching, as the doors burst open. More officers flooded in, their faces unreadable, their presence suffocating. The crowd shifted, pulled between hope and dread, between justice and erasure. The phones still hovered, but would recordings survive the night? Would the truth? The twins knew the game had only begun, and as the new officers spread through the bar, their leader pointing toward Marcus and Maya with a venomous glare, the twins realized the next few minutes would decide not just their fate, but the meaning of every oath they had ever sworn. The sirens outside faded into silence. The door slammed shut behind the last officer, and the circle closed again. Darkness had not saved them. Badges had not freed them. Now, surrounded on all sides by men who called themselves brothers in blue, Marcus and Maya faced the truth. They were no longer simply patrons in a bar, nor even FBI agents on duty. They were targets, and the night was far from over. Fear has a way of freezing a room, but tension, when it lingers long enough, turns sharp and explosive. In Edgewood's bar, the red emergency lights pulsed across faces etched with uncertainty, casting every movement in shadow. The patrons no longer laughed or whispered. They stood as silent witnesses, phones glowing like fireflies in the dark, each lens capturing what could no longer be hidden. And still, the lead officer refused to yield. His jaw was set, his pride swelling in place of reason. For men like him, surrender was worse than defeat. It was erasure. He would not be seen bending to two young black agents in front of a room full of witnesses. Marcus sensed it. He saw the tremor in the man's hand as it hovered near his belt, not quite drawing the weapon but daring himself closer. Maya read it too, her eyes narrowing, her body calculating the space between intention and disaster. They both knew this dance, hesitation before violence, pride before ruin. The new arrivals, the backup summoned by sirens, spread through the bar with deliberate weight. Some wore confusion on their faces, others the hardened mask of loyalty to their own. Their eyes darted between the twins' badges and the lead officer's glare, caught in a web of hierarchy and truth. The air was heavy with choices. Marcus broke the silence first. His voice was calm, deliberate, but filled with the kind of authority born from absolute certainty. "We are federal agents. You will stand down, now." The words rippled through the room, pulling gasps from the crowd, igniting whispers. The lead officer's face reddened, his teeth clenched, his nostrils flared. For a moment he looked like a man on the brink of striking, of lashing out not because of law, but because of wounded pride. "Federal agents?" He scoffed, his voice echoing over the murmurs. "Badges don't make you untouchable. You think flashing that means you're above suspicion?" He gestured to the crowd, his voice rising. "They think they can walk in here, start trouble, and hide behind a piece of tin?" The crowd shifted uneasily. Some lowered their phones, afraid of where the night was headed. Others raised them higher, determined to bear witness. The truth was now a battlefield of perception. Maya lifted her chin, the crimson glow painting her face in fire. "No," she thought, though she did not speak it aloud. "The badge doesn't make me untouchable. It makes me responsible. For the law you twist, for the lives you endanger, for the truth you fear." The standoff stretched, seconds feeling like eternity. And then came the moment that fractured it all. The lead officer lunged, not with a weapon drawn, not with the restraint of law, but with the raw violence of a man whose pride could no longer be contained. His hands reached for Marcus, his body colliding in a shove meant not to detain, but to dominate. The crowd gasped, the phones jerked, the officers at his side hesitated, but Marcus did not stumble. Trained reflexes held him steady. His free hand caught the man's wrist mid-motion, twisting just enough to halt the attack without breaking it. His voice, low and sharp, cut through the chaos. "Stand down!" The room froze again. The lead officer's breath hitched, his arm pinned, his pride bleeding into the silence. For a moment the world seemed suspended, until one of his men shouted, "He's resisting!" And just like that, the script began to write itself. The officers surged forward, not in hesitation but in frenzy, each step fueled by the cry of resistance. The crowd screamed, chairs toppled, glass shattered again. Phones shook as people scrambled for cover, desperate to record yet terrified to remain. Maya moved before thought, her instincts honed by years of training. She stepped between Marcus and the encroaching officers, her badge raised high, her other hand steady near her weapon, but not drawing. "Back off!" Her voice rang out, clear, commanding, undeniable. For a heartbeat it worked. The younger officers faltered, their eyes flicking to the badge, to the weight of what they risked. But the lead officer, still trapped in Marcus's grip, bellowed like a wounded beast. "They're a threat! Take them down!" The command ignited chaos. Hands reached for weapons. The crowd erupted in screams. Someone shoved past Maya, nearly knocking her to the floor. Marcus released the officer's wrist and stepped back, refusing to escalate. But it was too late. The moment had tipped. A gun cleared a holster. The metallic click echoed louder than any scream. The crowd scattered. Some dove for the floor, others bolted for the doors, their phones still recording, their terror fueling the storm. Maya's heart hammered. She saw the barrel rising, saw the finger tighten against the trigger, saw the decision that would mark this night forever. And then, The bar door burst open again. This time, it wasn't more police. It was suits. Dark, sharp, unmistakable. Federal agents. The bureau. The room convulsed with shock. The officers froze, their weapons half drawn, their authority suddenly contested by something larger than themselves. The lead agent, a woman with steel-gray eyes and a voice that cut like a blade, stepped forward. Enough! The word landed like a gavel. Every head turned. Every movement stilled. Marcus and Maya lowered their badges but did not retreat, their bodies still coiled for survival. Relief flickered at the edge of their fear, but it was fragile, precarious. The lead officer, his face twisted with rage and humiliation, spat at the floor. They started this. They provoked. Silence, the federal agent snapped. Her eyes did not leave him, her voice carrying the weight of authority he could never counterfeit. We've been watching. We know. Gasps rippled again, this time not from fear but revelation. The patrons leaned closer, their phones rising once more, desperate to capture every word. The bureau had been watching. Maya's chest tightened. Relief warred with unease. Watching meant surveillance. Surveillance meant suspicion. If the bureau had been tracking them, what else lay hidden beneath the surface of this night? The lead agent turned toward Marcus and Maya, her gaze unreadable. You two outside. Now. It was not request but command. The officers parted reluctantly, their anger simmering, their weapons sliding back into holsters. The crowd whispered, phones still capturing, hearts still racing. Marcus and Maya exchanged a glance, silent, waited, questioning. Trust was fragile, but the alternative was chaos. Together they moved toward the exit, the lead agent flanking them, the night air rushing to meet them as the door opened. Outside, the world was alive with flashing lights. Police cruisers lined the street, their sirens silenced but their presence deafening. And mixed among them, black SUVs, their tinted windows hiding more bureau agents inside. The twins stepped into the glow of red and blue, their faces stark against the chaos they left behind. For a brief second, it felt like freedom, but then the lead agent's voice cut through the night. You're coming with us. It wasn't protection, it was custody. The words hit harder than any shove, any threat, any gun drawn inside the bar. Marcus froze. Maya's stomach dropped. The crowd spilled outside, their phones catching every second, their whispers feeding the storm. Were they being saved or silenced? And as agents moved in, surrounding them with the same precision they had once commanded, Marcus and Maya realized the truth. The danger had never been just the bar. The danger was bigger, deeper, waiting for them all along. And now, under the glare of flashing lights and a city's eyes, the twins walked toward an unknown fate, betrayal or salvation lingering in every step. Silence. The word cut sharper than any blade. The lead officer's protest died in his throat, strangled by the authority of the woman now standing before him. Her presence filled the room, not just because of the badge on her belt, but because of the weight in her eyes. The gravity of someone who had spent years dismantling men who thought themselves untouchable. The other agents fanned out. A wall of dark suits against uniforms that suddenly seemed flimsy, almost theatrical. Phones captured it all, the raised guns lowering, the red emergency light painting fear across faces that only minutes ago brimmed with arrogance. Maya felt the air shift, a pressure releasing from her chest though her hands still trembled at her sides. Marcus, ever the anchor, kept his shoulders squared, his jaw set, but even he allowed the faintest flicker of relief. They were not safe yet, but they were no longer alone. The lead officer sneered, spitting venom even as the tide turned. They walked in here causing trouble. You don't know what... The bureau agent cut him off, her tone precise and merciless. We know exactly what happened here. Every phone in this room knows. And in case you forgot, obstruction and false reports carry weight you are not equipped to bear. Her gaze slid to Marcus and Maya, lingering just long enough to register recognition. A nod, subtle but firm, passed between them. Allies, witnesses, reinforcement. Agents, she said, her voice leveling into command. You're clear. We'll take it from here. But clarity did not erase danger. The local officers bristled, loyalty chaining them to their disgraced leader. One shifted uneasily, his hand twitching near his holster as if clinging to the last shred of control. Another muttered, "This is our town." The bureau agent stepped closer, her presence towering, though her height did not. Not tonight. Not anymore. The silence that followed was heavier than the chaos before it, because now the truth stood in the open, carved into every phone screen, etched into the memories of every trembling patron. Marcus lowered his badge but didn't pocket it. His eyes swept the room, scanning not for threats now, but for the witnesses. The woman crouched near the jukebox, the bartender clutching a towel like a shield, the students huddled together by the door. They had all seen it. They had all lived it, and in their silence lay the proof of what survival meant. Maya exhaled slowly, her hand brushing Marcus's, as though reminding herself he was still there, still solid, still unbroken. She looked at the lead officer one last time. His face was a mask of rage and defeat, but beneath it she saw what he feared most. Not punishment, not prison, but irrelevance. Because tonight, power had shifted. Not cleanly, not completely, but enough. The bureau agent raised her voice, speaking not just to the officers but to the entire room. This ends here. Everyone stand down. There will be reports. There will be investigations. And there will be consequences. The words rang final, undeniable. The officers, one by one, lowered their hands, their aggression crumbling into reluctant stillness. The lead officer's glare lingered, but his pride could no longer fuel action. He had been cornered, not by force but by truth. The crowd began to breathe again. Phones lowered, whispers rose. A fragile calm spread through the bar, stitched together by relief and disbelief. Maya finally holstered her badge. Marcus followed, the siblings standing shoulder to shoulder. They had survived the night, but survival was never the end. It was only the beginning of what came next. The hearings, the headlines, the reckonings written in ink and memory. As they stepped toward the bureau agents, the crowd parted. Not in fear, not in suspicion, but in something else. Recognition. For a fleeting moment, Marcus and Maya were no longer silhouettes in danger. They were proof that truth, even when battered, could still stand. But deep inside, both knew. This story was not over. The night had ended, but the fight was only sharpening its teeth. The ride back to headquarters was a blur of flashing lights and pounding silence. Marcus sat rigid in the back of the bureau vehicle, his badge heavy in his pocket, his reflection in the tinted window fractured by passing street lamps. Maya leaned beside him, her arms crossed tight, her gaze fixed not outside but inward, turning over every second of what had just happened, searching for where it could have gone differently, where they might have lost more than pride. At HQ, the night did not end. It only changed shape. Reports, interviews, statements, the machinery of accountability grinding slowly, too slowly. The bureau agents who had stepped in were allies. Yes, but even allies spoke in careful tones, always mindful of what would live forever on record. "You both need to know," one of them said quietly. A man with tired eyes and a voice dulled by years of battles like this. "What happened tonight will make noise. Too much noise to bury. But noise cuts both ways." Maya met his gaze. "Meaning." "Meaning?" he sighed. "The truth is out there now, captured on 100 shaky videos. But the machine that protects men like him, it's already moving too." Marcus's jaw tightened. "So we're witnesses and targets at the same time." The agent didn't argue. He didn't have to. By dawn, the first clips had already hit the internet. Blurry, grainy, but unmistakable. The officer lunging. The shout of "he's resisting." The guns half drawn before the bureau stormed in. Comments poured in by the thousands, some outraged, some defensive, some venomous. The truth had escaped the bar, but it was no longer theirs to control. Maya scrolled through the feed, her hand trembling. Faces she didn't know argued over her life as if it were a game. Strangers praised her, cursed her, doubted her. Every angle, every frame, dissected. Marcus placed a hand over hers, steadying her phone, steadying her. "We did what we had to. That's all we could do." Her eyes met his, weary but burning. "It won't be enough," he nodded. Not in agreement, not in defeat, but in recognition of the road that stretched ahead. The hearings, the testimonies, the smear campaigns, the nights where truth was both shield and target. And yet somewhere in the noise, something else stirred. Students from the bar posting in solidarity. The bartender giving a statement live on air. Patrons holding up their shaky phone footage and saying, "I saw it. I was there. This is real." The machine was moving, yes, but so was the resistance. As the sun bled into the city skyline, Marcus and Maya stood together on the steps of headquarters, their silhouettes stark against the morning light, tired, shaken, but unbroken. The fight was far from over. It had only just begun.